My name is Olivia, and I'm 58 years old. My family used to laugh at me for bringing coupons to dinner, called me cheap, boring, the woman who'd save herself to death. But one morning, they woke up to find something terrifying and unbelievable. My brother's $60,000 loan had vanished. My sister's credit cards showed a zero balance. My mother's overdue mortgage, gone. They thought it was a glitch, a scam, maybe divine intervention. But it wasn't any of those things. It was me. The same woman they'd mocked for years had secretly erased $134,000 of their debt without telling a soul. This is the story of how I turned their ridicule into quiet revenge. For as long as I can remember, I've been the boring one in my family. The woman who clips coupons, tracks every penny, and brings neatly labeled leftovers to family dinners. I'm the one who keeps her receipts in alphabetical order and balances her checkbook down to the cent. My sister Nina loves to remind me that I could turn fun into a math problem. My brother Calvin jokes that I probably have a spreadsheet for breathing. Even my mother Barbara calls me tightwad Olivia, half joking, half serious, as she waves off my advice about saving. They all laugh, but none of them have ever understood that being careful with money isn't a limitation. It's freedom. Every month, when my family would plan some lavish get-together, steak dinners, beach rentals, last-minute flights, I was always the one saying, maybe that's not in the budget right now. They'd roll their eyes like I was some kind of miser. But the truth is, I've lived both sides of life. I've known abundance, and I've known struggle. When my husband, Henry, passed away 5 years ago, my world split in two, the part that knew love and the part that had to survive after it. Henry was the dreamer in our relationship. He used to say, "Money comes and goes, Liv. Don't let it define you." But when the medical bills came pouring in, when the insurance barely covered half of what we owed, I had no choice but to let it define me, at least for a while. That's when I discovered something strange. I was good at managing money. Better than good, actually. I was meticulous. Every line item, every expense, every dollar had its place. While grief took away my sense of peace, budgeting gave it back. It became my coping mechanism, the one thing I could control when everything else felt like it was slipping away. I started with nothing but a notebook and an old laptop. Slowly, I tracked every bill, every penny saved. Within a year, I had cleared every bit of medical debt left behind. Within 3 years, my mortgage was gone. 5 years later, I had something I never thought I'd have again, a sense of security, a quiet, steady peace that came from knowing I could take care of myself. Of course, my family never saw any of that. They assumed I was scraping by on coupons and secondhand clothes. They never asked about my finances, and I never corrected them. I let them think I was barely getting by because, honestly, it was easier than explaining that I simply didn't live like them. I didn't need brand new cars or designer purses to feel successful. My joy came from watching the savings column grow on my spreadsheet each month. I still remember one particular dinner about a year ago. We were at Nina's favorite Italian restaurant, the kind that charges $14 for a side salad. When the waiter brought the check, I pulled out a coupon for 15% off. Nina sighed dramatically, Calvin groaned, and Mom gave me that pitying smile. "Liv," Nina said, swirling her wine, "you can't take your money with you when you die." I smiled and replied, "I'm not planning on dying broke either." They all laughed like I was the punchline. But as I tucked my coupon back into my purse, something in me hardened. They had no idea who I really was or what I'd managed to build. What none of them knew was that behind my so-called cheapness, I had quietly built a 6-figure savings account. I had investments, I had no debt, no credit card balances, and a home that was entirely mine. My frugality wasn't desperation, it was discipline. Then one night, everything shifted. It was a Sunday, and we were gathered at Mom's house for one of her famous potlucks. The table was overflowing with food, laughter, and the usual teasing. Nina was showing off a new handbag she couldn't afford. Calvin was bragging about his latest business venture, and Mom was hinting about remodeling her kitchen again. I was in the kitchen rinsing dishes when I heard them talking in the living room. Their voices were low, urgent, different from their usual chatter. Nina whispered, "I'm 3 months behind on my credit cards. I don't know what to do." Calvin muttered something about late payments and a car loan he couldn't keep up with. Then Mom sighed, saying she'd taken out another loan to cover home repairs. I froze, the plate still in my hand. The laughter from earlier suddenly felt hollow, echoing against their quiet confessions. They were drowning, buried under debt, pretending everything was fine. For a long moment I stood there, torn between anger and pity. These were the same people who mocked me for living simply, who laughed at my couponing, who said budgeting was a waste of time. And yet here they were, trapped in the very mess I'd spent my life avoiding. I dried my hands, walked back into the dining room, and smiled as if nothing had happened. But inside, something changed. I saw the situation clearly for the first time. They needed help. They would never ask for it. And if I offered, they'd refuse out of pride. So that night, as I drove home, my headlights cutting through the dark country road, I made a quiet decision. If they wouldn't accept my advice, I'd find another way to help them, but not in any way they would expect. The night I overheard my family's secret was the night I started my quiet revenge. That family dinner stayed with me like a song I couldn't get out of my head, except this tune was filled with guilt, denial, and the faint sound of desperation. I could still picture the flicker of candles on Mom's dining table, the laughter bouncing off the walls, the clinking of glasses as Nina poured another round of wine. From the outside, it looked like any other Sunday, our family pretending that everything was fine, but underneath the laughter, there was tension, a heaviness I hadn't noticed until that night. I kept replaying what I'd heard. Calvin's wife whispering about overdue mortgage payments, Nina muttering about maxed out cards, and Mom sighing over another home loan she could barely handle. They were all sinking, slowly, under the weight of their own decisions. And the irony of it all? These were the same people who'd mocked me for being careful, for counting pennies, for living below my means. For years, they'd told me to live a little, to stop worrying about money like it was oxygen. But now, their living had turned into gasping for air. When I got home that night, I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before going inside. The street was quiet, the moonlight cutting through the blinds as I walked into my small but peaceful house. It was paid off, every square inch of it mine. The stillness was comforting, but that night it felt heavier somehow. I made a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and just stared at the wall. My first emotion was anger, hot and sharp. I thought about every time Calvin had called me cheap, every time Nina had rolled her eyes at my budgeting lectures, every time Mom had told me I took money too seriously. I had spent my life being careful, disciplined, and mocked for it. And now those same people were drowning because they couldn't do what I did. But as the night dragged on, that anger began to fade into something else. Pity. They weren't bad people. They were just reckless, impulsive, raised in a world that told them happiness could be bought. They didn't understand that debt was just another kind of prison. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something. Not to rescue them, exactly, but to make a point, to show them that my way worked. That planning, saving, and being responsible wasn't something to mock, it was power. I opened my laptop and pulled up my financial spreadsheets. Numbers had always calmed me, and that night was no different. I created a new tab titled Family. Under each name, Calvin, Nina, and Mom, I listed what I knew. Approximate debts, habits, and expenses. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Calvin, multiple credit cards, a car loan, and possibly a second mortgage. Nina, endless online shopping, restaurant bills, and travel she couldn't afford. Mom, home repairs, small loans, and the weight of trying to keep up appearances. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen glowing in the dim light. They were all caught in a cycle that was slowly destroying them, and none of them could see it. That's when an idea began to form. It started small, almost innocent. What if I helped them catch up on a few bills? But the more I thought about it, the more the idea grew, twisting into something bolder. What if I cleared all their debts completely, quietly, anonymously, no lectures, no, I told you so. Just results. The thought sent a thrill through me. Not because I wanted their gratitude, but because it felt poetic, an act of revenge disguised as kindness. They'd never know it was me, but they'd feel it. They'd experience the power of financial freedom without understanding who gave it to them. This wasn't about buying love or forgiveness. I wasn't trying to be their hero. I wanted to prove that the boring, frugal, tightwad Olivia they'd mocked for years was the only one who had figured out life's hardest truth. Control your money, or it will control you. I started running numbers, calculating how much I could realistically spare. I wasn't rich, not in the traditional sense, but I had enough. My savings had grown to a little over $180,000. If I used most of it, I could erase their debts entirely and still have a small cushion left. It sounded insane at first, spending nearly everything I'd built for people who didn't respect me. But it wasn't about them. It was about balance, about righting a moral scale that had been tilted for too long. By midnight, I had a plan. I'd do it gradually, over several months. Small payments here and there, money orders, cashier's checks, direct payments to lenders. No names, no trails. I sat back, staring at the spreadsheet that would soon become my quiet rebellion. The numbers looked almost poetic. Rows and columns of control, precision, and purpose. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. My revenge wouldn't come from words or confrontation. It would come from silence, from the shock on their faces when their debts disappeared and they couldn't explain why. I closed my laptop, feeling a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. They thought my spreadsheets were boring, my coupons ridiculous, my habits pointless, but they were about to learn that discipline was the greatest power of all. I turned off the light, whispering to myself, one person at a time, Olivia. One person at a time. Because by the time I was done, $134,000 of family debt would vanish into thin air, and they'd never know how. If they wouldn't listen to my advice, I'd let my actions speak louder than words. Once I made the decision, there was no turning back. I told myself this wasn't about control or pride. It was about clarity. If they wouldn't listen to my lectures about responsibility, then I'd let my actions teach the lesson for me, quietly, efficiently, and without a trace. The first step was gathering information. I had to know exactly what I was dealing with before making any move. So I started paying closer attention, listening during conversations that most people would ignore. Calvin was the easiest to figure out. He couldn't keep his mouth shut when it came to money. One night at Mom's, he bragged about how he'd finally qualified for another credit card, saying it was a sign of financial maturity. I smiled politely, but I made a mental note. Later that week, while helping him fix his laptop, I saw an open browser tab with an overdue payment reminder. A few quick clicks later, and I had the information I needed. 2 credit cards and a car loan totaling around $60,000. Nina was trickier. She didn't talk about her finances unless she was complaining, but her social media told the story for her. Vacations, new handbags, dinners at expensive restaurants. I knew she worked part-time as a freelance designer, but that lifestyle didn't add up. One afternoon, while she was visiting Mom, she left her phone unlocked on the table. A message popped up from her bank. Payment overdue. Student loan and personal credit line. My heart sank. A bit of quiet research revealed she was sitting under $48,000 of combined debt. And then there was Mom. My mother had always cared too much about appearances. She wanted to be the kind of woman who had it all together, even if she was crumbling underneath. Her house was beautiful, but I knew she'd taken out a home equity loan years ago to redo the kitchen. Lately, she'd been hinting about tight months, which was her polite way of admitting she was struggling again. After some careful checking through public records, yes, I went that far, I found she still owed about $26,000. When I added it all up, the number stared back at me like a dare. $134,000. I sat there, my calculator blinking on the kitchen table, feeling the weight of it settle over me. I knew I could handle it, barely, but it would take precision. So I opened a new account at a small credit union across town and labeled it Project Clean Slate. It felt strange giving it a name, but something about it made the mission feel tangible. Every week, I transferred a few $1,000s into that account. I told myself it was a donation to peace of mind, my family's and mine. I mapped out the payments in my spreadsheet, due dates, account numbers, balances, collection agencies, and loan types. I even tracked the postal routes for certain payments so I could estimate when they'd be processed. I wasn't just budgeting anymore. I was conducting an invisible operation. The first payment I made was small, just a test. A $300 cashier's check sent anonymously to one of Calvin's credit card companies. When the next billing cycle hit, the balance reflected it. He didn't question it, probably thought it was a refund or bank adjustment. That gave me the confidence to move forward. Within a month, I had paid off $4,000 of Calvin's car loan, $2,000 of Nina's student debt, and $1,000 toward Mom's home equity loan. Each payment was sent from a different location using different methods: money orders, cashier's checks, even prepaid cards. I left no paper trail. I was careful, meticulous, methodical. Every time I saw the words "paid in full" or "balance reduced" pop up on a statement I intercepted or overheard, I felt an electric rush in my chest. It wasn't joy exactly, it was vindication. I was fixing what they couldn't, doing what they refused to learn. Weeks turned into months, and I became addicted to the rhythm of it. Every Friday night, I'd sit at my desk with a cup of tea, sort through envelopes, and make another round of payments. It was my quiet rebellion, my secret satisfaction. Meanwhile, my family started noticing changes, though none of them connected the dots. Calvin bragged one afternoon that his credit score had miraculously jumped 80 points. He said, "Guess the universe is finally rewarding me." I nearly choked on my coffee, trying not to laugh. Nina mentioned that her student loan company had sent her a letter saying her balance was suddenly lower than expected. She called it a system glitch and joked that maybe she should start buying lottery tickets. Even Mom seemed puzzled when her monthly statement showed that her loan was months ahead of schedule. They were baffled, confused, and I loved every second of it. Watching their confusion evolve into cautious relief was better than any "I told you so" I could have said. But I knew I couldn't let it go to my head. The bigger the operation got, the riskier it became. I started double-checking everything: postmarks, amounts, payment sources. I couldn't afford a single mistake. By the 5th month, Calvin's car loan was gone, Nina's smallest debt was fully paid, and Mom's loan balance had dropped to less than half. I could almost taste the end. I was methodical to the point of obsession, updating my spreadsheet nightly like a general reviewing a battle plan. And still, no one suspected a thing. They thought luck had finally turned their way. Calvin called it divine intervention. Nina said it must be karma. Mom whispered that maybe Dad was watching over them. I let them believe whatever they wanted. It wasn't my place to ruin their peace. But just as I began to think I could actually pull this off, something shifted. Calvin's curiosity started turning into concern. He wasn't the sharpest with money, but he wasn't stupid either. One night he called me, his voice low and uneasy. "Liv," he said, "you ever heard of debts just disappearing?" I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought he could hear it through the phone. That's when I realized my perfect little operation wasn't as invisible as I thought. And Calvin, always the loudest in the family, was about to start asking questions I couldn't afford to answer. The first person to notice was Calvin, and he wasn't grateful. He was furious. It happened on a Thursday night. I remember because I was sitting on the couch, sipping chamomile tea and reviewing my spreadsheets like I always did before bed. The phone rang, and I saw Calvin's name flash across the screen. He rarely called me directly. He usually texted something sarcastic or asked Mom to pass a message along. So when I saw his name, my stomach tightened. "Hey, Liv," he said, his voice strained and quick. "Did you do something to my accounts?" I blinked, heart suddenly thudding. "What are you talking about?" I asked as calmly as I could. He sighed loudly, frustration dripping through the phone. "My debt collector just called to tell me my entire car loan was paid off. All 60 grand of it. They said the balance is cleared and the account's closed. That can't be right. It has to be a scam, right? You didn't..." He stopped mid-sentence, the silence stretching between us. I forced a laugh. "Calvin, why on earth would I have anything to do with your car loan?" There was a pause, and then a slow, suspicious tone crept into his voice. "I don't know. You're the one who's all into numbers and banks and money stuff. Maybe you were trying to help?" I let my voice drop an octave, steady even, uninterested. "If I were going to help you, Calvin, I'd tell you. But I think you should probably call your bank. Maybe they made an error." He grumbled something under his breath and said, "Yeah, maybe," before hanging up abruptly. I sat there staring at the phone, my pulse racing. He wasn't convinced. I could hear it in his voice. Within hours, I knew he had told Nina and Mom, because the family group chat lit up like wildfire. Nina: "Wait, what? Calvin's debt just disappeared?" Mom: "That's impossible. Maybe it's some kind of debt forgiveness program." Calvin: "Or maybe someone's messing with me. This feels weird." I typed a quick response: "Probably a bank glitch. You should confirm it before celebrating." Then I muted the chat. My hands trembled slightly, but a small smile crept across my face. The operation was still under wraps, for now. The next morning, Nina called. Her voice was light, almost teasing. "Okay, weird question," she said. "How much do you know about debt relief scams?" I froze mid-step. "Scams?" "Yeah," she continued, "because, I logged into my student loan portal this morning, and my balance dropped by 10 grand overnight. 10 grand, Olivia. Either I'm hallucinating or someone is playing a sick joke." I swallowed hard, trying not to sound too interested. "That's strange. Maybe they recalculated something?" She laughed. "Right, because the Department of Education suddenly grew a conscience. Sure." I could hear her flipping papers in the background. "You didn't hear anything about this, did you? Like some government forgiveness program?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "No, nothing like that. Maybe you should call them and ask." "Already did. They said payments were processed through an external account, but they can't tell me who. Said it's confidential. How is that even possible?" I managed a light chuckle. "Maybe you've got a secret admirer," I joked. She laughed, but there was a note of unease under it. "Yeah, sure. A secret admirer who pays off debt instead of buying flowers. Lucky me." When she hung up, I sank into my chair and exhaled. I'd wanted them to feel relief, maybe gratitude, but not suspicion. Still, I couldn't stop now. I was in too deep. Over the next few weeks, the ripples spread further. Mom started receiving letters from her lender saying her payments were well ahead of schedule. She called me, bewildered, asking if I'd made a mistake when I'd helped her set up autopay years ago. I pretended to be as confused as she was, telling her maybe the bank recalculated interest or applied an extra payment. The family group chat turned into a detective board of wild theories. Nina: "Maybe Dad's old life insurance finally processed?" Calvin: "It's been 10 years, Nina. I think we'd know." Mom: "Could someone have hacked the bank system?" Calvin: "If this is a hacker, they're the nicest criminal in history." They laughed about it, but I could tell beneath the jokes was growing unease. None of them liked things they couldn't explain, especially when it involved money. And me? I felt a dangerous mixture of nerves and satisfaction. I was controlling the chaos from behind the curtain. Every spreadsheet update, every anonymous payment, every whispered conversation about mystery miracles fueled a strange exhilaration inside me. For once, I was the unpredictable one in the family. I began to imagine their faces when they finally realized everything was paid off. Maybe they'd be grateful. Maybe they'd finally understand why I'd lived the way I had. Maybe they'd see that discipline and love could coexist, that I hadn't done this to shame them, but to show them freedom. But as my quiet triumph built momentum, I made a mistake, one I didn't notice until it was too late. It was a small thing, something I thought wouldn't matter. I used the same post office twice in 1 week, and the clerk, an older man named Paul who'd seen me a few times, mentioned casually that it was nice to see a familiar face sending out so many money orders. And standing right beside me, waiting in line to buy stamps, was someone who shouldn't have heard that. Nina. Her eyes flicked toward me, then toward the stack of envelopes in my hand. For a second, our gazes locked. I saw her expression shift from curiosity to suspicion. I smiled tightly, forcing a light laugh, but my hands were trembling as I tucked the envelopes into my bag. In that instant, I knew my perfect little system had a crack, and cracks have a way of widening fast. A single misdirected email almost ruined my secret. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind where the house feels too still, the clock ticks too loudly, and every sound seems sharper than usual. I had just finished transferring funds for another round of payments and was sending confirmation emails to myself for record keeping. It was a ritual I'd developed over the past few months, a way to track each money order and cashier's check in case anything went wrong. But that morning, something did go wrong. Without realizing it, I accidentally sent one of those confirmations, the one from Calvan's lender, to an old shared email account that Nina and I had used years ago when we were handling Mom's estate after Dad passed. It was an account we'd both long stopped using, or so I thought. Not 5 minutes later, my phone rang. "Liv?" Nina's voice crackled through the line, edged with something I hadn't heard from her before. Confusion mixed with curiosity. "I just got a weird email from your name. It's some kind of payment receipt. Says, thank you for your payment of $2,750 toward loan balance. What is this?" My blood turned cold. I froze, staring at the screen like it could undo what I'd done. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Anything. "Oh, that," I said, forcing a light laugh. "Oh, goodness. That must be an old auto payment from years ago. I've been clearing out old files lately. You know how Gmail syncs things weird sometimes?" There was silence on the other end. Then, slowly, she said, "You sure? It's dated today, Liv." My grip on the phone tightened. That's odd. Maybe it's one of those spam confirmations. Just delete it, okay?" Another pause. "Yeah, sure. I'll delete it." Her tone didn't match her words. I could feel her suspicion hanging in the air like static. After she hung up, I sat there for several minutes, heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. I had come too far to let one careless email unravel everything. That night, I decided I needed to throw her off the trail. Fast. The next time I saw her, I deliberately brought up money, but in a way that reinforced her old image of me. Over dinner, I sighed dramatically and said, "I've been cutting back lately. Groceries are getting expensive. I might cancel my streaming services." She smiled, her curiosity flickering behind polite eyes. "Still budgeting everything, huh?" I chuckled softly. "You know me. I'm too stubborn to change." She seemed to relax a little, which was exactly what I needed. To sell the illusion, I even started showing small signs of struggle. I drove my old car more often, avoided family dinners at expensive restaurants, and casually mentioned watching expenses whenever money came up. Behind the scenes, though, I was working faster than ever. I realized I couldn't drag this out any longer. The risk of exposure was growing. I needed to finish it before anyone connected the dots. I doubled my transfers to Project Clean Slate. Each payment felt heavier now, not financially, but emotionally. I wasn't just fixing numbers on a page. I was rewriting our family's entire financial story, one secret payment at a time. I started with Calvin's remaining balance, just under $8,000 spread across his last two accounts. I cleared them both within 2 weeks. When his credit card company mailed him a "congratulations on completing your repayment" notice, he called me again, half laughing, half nervous. "Liv, this is insane. Something's going on. My accounts are clean. Like totally clean. I didn't even make payments this month." I kept my voice calm. "That's great, Calvin. Maybe the universe finally decided to give you a break." He laughed, but there was hesitation in it. "Yeah, maybe." A week later, I sent off the final payment for Nina, $4,000 toward her remaining loan balance. When I checked the confirmation, my hands actually trembled. That was it. Every single debt, Calvin's $60,000, Nina's $48,000, and Mom's $26,000, was gone. It was done. I sat there staring at my spreadsheet, the final totals glowing on the screen. My breath came out shaky, almost disbelieving. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt conflicted. Relief washed through me, yes, but beneath it was a ripple of guilt I couldn't quite suppress. Should I have told them? Should I have trusted that they'd understand my reasons? But then I remembered their laughter years ago, the jokes about my coupons, the way they rolled their eyes whenever I tried to help. No, they would never have accepted it. Not then, and maybe not now. I closed my laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. For the first time in months, there were no more envelopes waiting to be mailed, no payments to schedule, no balances to track. My quiet mission was complete. But peace didn't come. Instead, there was an uneasy emptiness, like the calm before a storm. I told myself it was just the adjustment, the end of an obsession that had driven me for months. But deep down, I knew better. Life had been too quiet lately, too controlled. And then, almost as if fate had been waiting for the perfect moment, everything came crashing down. Literally, it started with a storm, a real one. Thunder, wind, and rain pounding against the roof of my mother's house, where she kept years' worth of old paperwork stacked in her basement. And buried among those boxes were the receipts, stubs, and records that were never meant to see the light of day. When the truth finally came out, it wasn't the way I planned. It happened on a night that started like any other, but ended with my world collapsing in slow motion. A brutal storm rolled through town, shaking windows, rattling trees, and flooding streets. I was home, curled under a blanket, listening to the thunder when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Basement's flooding. I need help. Please come." I didn't hesitate. I threw on my raincoat, grabbed my boots, and drove through the downpour to her house. When I arrived, water was already seeping through the basement door. Mom was trying to stack old boxes onto chairs, her slippers soaked, her face pale with panic. "Mom, go upstairs. I'll handle it," I said, sloshing through the ankle-deep water. I grabbed towels, old rags, anything I could find. But as I moved the boxes, the damage was already done. One of the filing cabinets had toppled over, and its drawers were half open, spilling out papers like soggy confetti. I recognized the cabinet immediately. It was the one she kept all her old financial records in: bank statements, property bills, insurance documents. I tried to pull the drawer out of the water, but it was too heavy. The papers were sticking together, the ink bleeding into smudges. Then something caught my eye. Floating in the murky water were small, rectangular slips of paper, money orders, dozens of them. I froze, heart dropping to my stomach. They weren't blank. The payees matched perfectly. Calvin's loan company, Nina's lender, Mom's bank, and although my name wasn't written anywhere, I instantly recognized the routing numbers printed in tiny ink at the bottom. They were from my credit union, my branch, my account. For a moment, the basement seemed to tilt. I couldn't breathe. All those months of secrecy, of precision, of staying invisible, and it all came undone by a leaking pipe and a rusted drawer. "Olivia?" Mom's voice came from behind me. I turned slowly to see her standing at the bottom of the stairs, her expression a mix of confusion and dawning realization. She was holding one of the damp slips in her trembling hand. "What is this?" she whispered. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My mind was blank, my throat dry. Before I could find the words, heavy footsteps echoed from upstairs. Calvin and Nina had arrived. Within minutes, the basement became a storm of its own. Voices clashing, emotions colliding. Calvin was the first to fully grasp it. He picked up one of the money orders and squinted. "This routing number, this is your bank, isn't it? The same one you've been using for years." "Olivia," Nina said sharply, "what is this? Why are there payments to my loan company here?" I took a deep breath, my hands shaking. "I was just trying to help," I said softly. "You were all struggling. I thought if I could clear the debts—" Calvin cut me off, his voice rising. "You thought you could what? Sneak around and fix everything like some kind of financial vigilante?" Nina's face was flushed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Do you think we're charity cases? That we couldn't handle our own problems?" Mom was crying quietly, still clutching one of the soggy slips. "Olivia, how could you not tell us?" Their words hit me harder than I expected. I'd imagined this moment so many times. Imagined gratitude, maybe even pride. But standing there, surrounded by soaked paper and judgmental eyes, I felt nothing but shame. "I didn't do it to embarrass you," I said, my voice cracking. "It wasn't about pity. It was about showing you what discipline could do, what planning, saving, and patience could achieve. I wanted you to see that." Calvin slammed his fist against the wall. "You wanted control. That's what you wanted. You couldn't stand that we didn't live like you." "That's not true," I said weakly, but my protest was drowned out by Nina's voice. "You lied to us," she snapped. "For months. Do you even realize how humiliating this is? Finding out this way?" The air was thick with hurt and misunderstanding. No matter what I said, they couldn't hear me. Not over their own pride. Not over the sting of being saved without consent. Finally, Calvin shook his head and muttered, "You should have just stayed out of it." He grabbed his coat and stomped upstairs. Nina followed, her eyes glassy but hard. "You don't fix people's lives without asking, Olivia," she said, before slamming the door behind her. Mom lingered for a moment longer, tears streaking her cheeks. She reached out like she wanted to touch my arm, then hesitated. "I know you meant well," she whispered, "but sometimes love doesn't need to be secret." Then she turned and followed them. I stood there in the half-flooded basement, surrounded by the ruined remnants of my secret. The money orders, the ink, the soaked papers floating like ghosts of good intentions. The house felt emptier than ever. When the storm finally passed and I drove home, I couldn't shake the image of their faces. Shocked, betrayed, hurt. I'd set out to teach them a lesson about discipline, about freedom. Instead, I'd taught them that I didn't trust them to handle their own lives. For the first time, I questioned everything. Maybe I had gone too far. Maybe I'd crossed from caring into control. The next morning, I checked my phone, expecting at least one message. An apology, a question, something. Nothing. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into a month. And in all that time, not a single call came from them. I thought I'd lost my family forever until something unexpected happened. The weeks after that confrontation stretched into silence so heavy it felt like a second winter. My phone stayed quiet. No calls, no texts. Every time I passed Mom's number on my contact list, my stomach clenched with a mix of longing and shame. I wanted to reach out, to explain again, to fix what had been broken. But for once. In my life, I didn't have a plan for this kind of damage. I threw myself into routine to fill the emptiness. I organized drawers that didn't need organizing. I cleaned the house until the scent of lemon polish clung to everything. But nothing erased the ache of loss. My family, the people I had worked so hard to protect, even in secret, wanted nothing to do with me. 2 months went by before anything changed. Then, one morning, I opened my mailbox and saw an envelope addressed in Nina's handwriting. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside wasn't a letter at first glance. It was a check. Confused, I unfolded the note tucked behind it. The check wasn't made out to me. It was blank. The note read, "You don't need money, Olivia. You need to know you were right. You saved me, and I just didn't know how to say thank you." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I pressed the paper against my chest and let myself cry, really cry, for the first time since that storm. A few days later, Calvin called. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, stripped of sarcasm and bravado. "Hey, Liv," he said, awkwardly clearing his throat. I wanted to say sorry. I didn't get it before, and any of it. You weren't trying to make us feel small. You were trying to help." I held the phone in silence, not trusting my voice. He continued, "You'll laugh, but I started tracking my expenses. Got one of those apps you like. Turns out I was spending almost $500 a month on takeout. Now I cook. It's kind of calming." I laughed through tears. "Welcome to adulthood, Calvin." He chuckled. "Guess I'm a late bloomer." After that call, something inside me began to soften. Maybe this wasn't the end of us after all. Maybe time had done what arguments never could, given perspective. A week later, Mom called too. Her tone was gentle, tentative. "Sweetheart, would you come over for dinner? I think we should talk." I almost said no. I wasn't sure I could face her yet, but something in her voice, fragile, sincere, made me agree. That Sunday, I walked up her porch steps with my heart pounding. When she opened the door, I braced for tension, but instead she smiled and pulled me into a hug. It was soft and trembling, the kind of hug that says more than words ever could. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the kind of meal she used to make when we were kids. Around the table sat Nina and Calvin, both quieter than usual. No teasing, no judgment, just the steady warmth of people who'd finally started to understand each other. Mom broke the silence first. "We've all been doing some thinking," she said, looking at me with eyes full of remorse. "I was wrong to mock you all those years. I thought being careful meant being afraid. I see now it meant being smart." Nina nodded. "You gave us a gift we didn't deserve. I used to think money was meant to be spent, as soon as I got it. But after what happened, I started writing down everything I buy. It's weird. It actually feels good to be in control." Calvin grinned sheepishly. and I'm saving for the first time in my life. I even canceled my cable. Didn't know the world wouldn't end without sports channels. We all laughed, and the sound felt lighter than it had in years. Mom poured coffee and said quietly, I refinanced the house, got a lower rate, and paid off the last of my small loans. I think I finally understand what you were trying to show us. I looked at her, at all of them, and realized something had shifted. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. For years, they had seen me as a miser, a killjoy, the family accountant no one asked for. But now I saw recognition in their eyes. Not pity, not mockery, respect. The apology I never thought I'd hear came next. We were awful to you, Nina said. We made fun of the one person who actually had it figured out. Calvin nodded. Yeah, I thought you were trying to control us, but you were just trying to protect us. I get it now. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We love you, Olivia. And we're sorry. Tears burned my eyes again, but this time they came with a smile. I wasn't trying to make you feel bad, I said softly. I just wanted us all to be okay. For the first time in months, the ache in my chest eased. The walls between us had cracked, and light was finally streaming through. As the evening wound down, we sat together, sharing stories and laughter, real laughter, the kind that comes from forgiveness. When I left that night, my heart was lighter than it had been in years. But just as I started to believe everything had finally fallen back into place, something unexpected happened. A week later, another envelope arrived in my mailbox, this one with no return address, no handwriting I recognized. Inside, there was no note, no message, just a single bank statement with my name on it, and a deposit I hadn't made, a deposit for $25,000. Just when I thought the story was over, they turned the tables on me. My 59th birthday arrived quietly, without the usual fanfare. I hadn't planned to celebrate. After everything that had happened, I figured a quiet night at home would be enough. But a few days before, Mom called and insisted, We're doing dinner. No excuses, just family. Something in her voice told me this wasn't just a casual get-together. Still, I agreed. When I arrived at Mom's house that Saturday evening, the warmth hit me before I even stepped inside. The smell of roasted chicken, cinnamon candles, and something intangible in the air. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely welcome. The tension that once clung to every word, every glance, was gone. Nina greeted me at the door with a bright smile and an apron dusted in flour. You're not allowed to lift a finger. Tonight, she said, hugging me tightly. This one's all about you. Calvin followed, a little awkward, but smiling too. Happy birthday, Liv, he said. We even made you dessert, and before you ask, no, it's not from a box. We laughed as Mom emerged from the kitchen, her eyes glistening with warmth. Sit, sweetheart, she said softly. You deserve to be spoiled for once. The dinner was simple, home-cooked, cozy, full of love. I hadn't realized how much I missed that kind of connection until I saw it reflected in their faces. No one was on edge. No one was hiding anything. We ate, we talked, and we even laughed about old memories. The time Nina accidentally dyed her hair green in high school, the way Calvin used to sneak cookies before dinner, Dad's terrible jokes that Mom still pretended to find funny. It felt like family again. When the plates were cleared, Nina brought out a cake, vanilla with buttercream frosting, the same kind Mom used to make for our childhood birthdays. The candles flickered softly as they sang. I laughed through tears as I blew them out, silently wishing that this peace would last. After dessert, Calvin stood up, looking strangely nervous. Okay, so we've got one more thing, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. This is from all of us. He handed me an envelope, plain, white, unassuming. I frowned and opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a bank statement. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my eyes landed on the bolded line near the top. Deposit $25,000 into my account. My breath caught in my throat. What is this? I whispered, my voice trembling. Nina smiled through glassy eyes. It's us saying thank you. I shook my head, still staring at the paper. You didn't have to do this. I never wanted repayment. Calvin grinned, rubbing the back of his neck. We know. That's why we wanted to. It's not about the money, Liv. It's about what you taught us. He gestured toward Nina and Mom. We pulled together what we could. Took a while, but we wanted to give back. You spent so long helping us, even when we didn't deserve it. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm but gentle, her eyes shimmering with emotion. You gave us freedom, Olivia. You didn't just pay off our debts. You gave us a second chance. You showed us what responsibility looks like. Now let us give you something in return. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Tears welled up and blurred everything around me. I'd spent so long thinking of myself as the caretaker, the fixer, the one who had to hold everything together. But now, sitting at that table, I realized something had changed. They weren't broken anymore. They'd learned, grown, healed, and they wanted me to feel that same release. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Nina smiled. Just say you'll accept it. Please. It's not just money. It's our way of honoring you. I laughed through the tears. You sound like a Hallmark card. She grinned. Maybe, but this one's backed by cash. We all laughed then. Real, hearty laughter that filled the room and erased months of pain. For the first time in years, there were no secrets, no tension, no resentment. Just love, gratitude, and the sound of a family finally at peace. As the night went on, we shared more stories, more laughter, even a few tears. Calvin told me about his newfound passion for cooking, and Mom proudly announced she'd paid off her refinanced loan 6 months early. Nina said she'd started a budgeting journal and was saving for her first house. Each story was a little piece of redemption, a quiet echo of what I'd hoped for all along. My revenge had never really been about humiliation or one-upmanship. It had turned into something deeper, something transformative. Redemption, for them, and maybe for me too. When the evening finally ended, they walked me to the door. Mom hugged me tight, whispering, "You did good, Liv. You always did." Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The windshield wipers beat softly against the rain, and the city lights blurred in the distance. My phone buzzed with a message from Nina. "We love you. Don't ever forget that." I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks. For so long, I'd believed I needed to teach them something. But in the end, they'd taught me too. About forgiveness, about love, about letting go. When I got home, I set the bank statement on my desk and powered on my old laptop. My budgeting spreadsheet blinked to life, the familiar cells and numbers glowing softly. I scrolled through it, my fingers hovering over the rows that once dictated every dollar of my life. And then I smiled, because I wasn't done yet. Just when I thought the story was over, they turned the tables on me. My 59th birthday crept up quietly. I wasn't planning on celebrating. Peace had only just settled between us, and I didn't want to stir it. But Mom called 3 days before and said firmly, "We're having dinner, no arguments." I almost declined, afraid of reopening old wounds, but something in her tone felt different, lighter, almost excited. So I said yes. That Saturday the sun dipped low behind her house, and for once, everything looked calm. When I stepped inside, the smell of roast chicken and cinnamon drifted through the air. Nina was in the kitchen, humming, flour dusting her apron. Calvin was setting the table with an awkward smile. Mom stood in the doorway, her eyes warm. "You're our guest of honor tonight," she said. The dinner itself felt different. There was laughter again, real laughter. No teasing about my coupons, no awkward silences. Just conversation that flowed as easily as the gravy. We talked about childhood memories, old neighbors, even Dad's corny jokes. For the first time in years, the house felt like home. After dessert, Mom's vanilla cake with buttercream, my favorite, Calvin cleared his throat. "Okay," he said, standing up. "We have one more surprise." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. My heart skipped. "Calvin, what did you do?" He grinned. "It's not just from me. It's from all of us." I opened the envelope carefully, expecting maybe a gift card or a handwritten note. Instead, there was a single folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it and froze. It was a bank statement, my bank statement, a recent one, and staring back at me in bold letters was a deposit line that made me blink twice. $25,000 deposited into my account. I looked up, confused. What is this?" Nina smiled, tears already gathering. That's from us. Calvin nodded. We pooled money together. Took some time, a lot of saving, but we wanted to repay you, even if you didn't ask. I stared at them, speechless. You shouldn't have. Mom reached over, covering my hand with hers. We wanted to. You gave us something we didn't know we needed. Freedom. You lifted us when we were too proud to ask for help. Nina sniffed, laughing through her tears. You taught us responsibility, Liv. You showed us what it really means to be independent. This isn't just money, it's gratitude. Calvin added quietly, You gave us a clean slate. This is us giving a little of it back. The lump in my throat was so thick I could barely breathe. For months I'd imagined every possible ending. Anger, resentment, maybe indifference. But not this. Not generosity. Not grace. I blinked back tears and managed to whisper, I don't know what to say. Mom squeezed my hand tighter. Say you'll accept it. I tried to protest again, but the words caught in my throat. Finally, I nodded. Okay, I said softly. Thank you. They smiled, and I saw something in their eyes I hadn't seen. Respect. Not the kind born out of obligation or guilt, but genuine, hard-earned respect. Dinner turned into laughter again. Stories about how Calvin had learned to cook. Turns out recipes actually help, he admitted. How Nina now kept a budgeting journal. How Mom had refinanced her home and even started a small savings account she proudly called her Rainy Day Miracle. I listened, amazed. These were the same people who once mocked me for bringing leftovers and clipping coupons. Now they were teaching each other the value of patience and discipline. Somewhere between the coffee and the goodbyes, I realized my so-called revenge had never been revenge at all. It had been redemption. For them, for me, for all the years we misunderstood one another. When it was time to leave, Mom walked me to the door and hugged me tightly. You did good, Liv, she whispered. You always did. The night air was cool as I stepped outside. My car sat under the soft glow of the streetlight. Turned back once more to see them waving from the doorway. Calvin's arm around Mom's shoulders, Nina leaning against the frame, smiling. It was a picture I wanted to keep forever. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The road shimmered in the headlights, the hum of the tires, a soft rhythm beneath the quiet. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A text from Nina. We love you. Don't ever forget that. I smiled, tears sliding down my cheeks. When I got home, I set my purse down, walked to my desk, and opened my old laptop. My budgeting spreadsheet appeared instantly. Rows of numbers, color-coded cells, the organized rhythm of my life. I stared at it for a long moment, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Then I smiled to myself. Because even though my family was finally free, my story wasn't finished. There were more people who needed what I'd learned. And as I scrolled to the bottom of my spreadsheet, I began typing a new header in bold letters, Project Second Chance. I closed the laptop, feeling that familiar spark again, the quiet thrill of purpose. Because I wasn't done yet, my quiet revenge turned into a legacy. It's strange how something that started out of hurt can evolve into something so full of purpose. I never planned to become a teacher or a mentor. I was just a woman who wanted her family to understand that stability could be beautiful. But a few months after that birthday dinner, an idea began to take shape. I was sipping coffee one morning, scrolling through community posts online, when I noticed how many women my age were talking about financial struggles. Widows living on fixed incomes, retirees worried about outliving their savings, mothers trying to help grown children without sinking themselves. Each story sounded like a chapter from my own life. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the only Olivia out there. So I started small. I rented the back room of the local library on Tuesday evenings and posted a flyer on the bulletin board. Budgeting for Freedom, a free workshop for women 50 plus. Learn to take control of your money and your life. The first night, only 3 women showed up. They sat with crossed arms, skeptical but curious. I smiled and started the way I always did, with honesty. I told them my story, how I'd been mocked for saving, how I'd been widowed, how budgeting saved not just my finances but my sanity. By the end of that hour, they were crying, not out of sadness but relief. Someone finally spoke their language, truth without judgment. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. Within weeks, my little class had grown to 20, then 40, and soon the library offered me a larger space. We laughed, we shared, we learned. I taught them to track expenses, to build emergency funds, to understand credit scores without fear. And as the weeks turned into months, something incredible happened. These women started teaching. What once felt like revenge had become a ripple of empowerment. Soon after, my family joined me. It started with Calvin. He showed up one evening, shy but determined, and asked if he could help set up chairs. I think he was nervous. He'd never been comfortable talking about money before. But when the topic turned to debt, one of the women asked, "Has anyone here ever climbed out of a big financial hole?" Calvin hesitated, then raised his hand. He told them about his past, the loans, the late payments, the sleepless nights. He spoke about how it felt when his debts vanished and how he'd learned to manage money since. "I used to think budgeting was punishment," he said. "Now it's my peace." The room erupted in applause. Watching him that night, I felt tears prick my eyes. He wasn't just telling a story, he was transforming it. Nina came next. She'd started journaling her expenses months ago, and now she was eager to share her own evolution. She stood in front of the class, holding her small notebook, and said, "I used to think spending made me feel powerful. But control, that's real power." Her voice shook, but her words landed like lightning. The women leaned in, nodding, some even taking notes. And then there was Mom, my proud, elegant mother, who once thought budgeting was a sign of fear. She began attending the workshops regularly, sitting among women her age who carried the same quiet shame she once did. One day, she surprised me by asking if she could speak at the end of class. "I used to believe talking about money was impolite," she said, "but silence keeps us trapped. My daughter showed me that facing numbers isn't scary, it's freeing, and if I can do it at 78, anyone can. That moment will stay with me forever." Within a year, Budgeting for Freedom had become a full-fledged community program. Local papers wrote articles calling it a grassroots movement of financial healing. I didn't see it that way, though. I just saw a room full of women realizing they weren't powerless. Sometimes I'd stand at the back of the room during a workshop, watching my family help others the way I once tried to help them in secret. The sight always filled me with quiet pride. Calvin laughing with the younger husbands who tagged along, Nina helping someone build their first budget template, Mom holding the hand of a woman in tears after facing her debt for the first time. I saw generations changing, one spreadsheet, one story, one person at a time. And in those moments, I understood something I never had before. My revenge hadn't destroyed anything. It had rebuilt everything. Looking back now, I realize I didn't just pay off their debts. I rewrote our entire family story. I turned pain into purpose, silence into education, and judgment into empathy. The woman they once mocked for being cheap had become the reason they found peace. I don't keep as many spreadsheets these days, just one. It's called Legacy. Every time a new person joins our program, I add their name. It's not about numbers anymore. It's about the lives changed through discipline, patience, and second chances. Sometimes I think about Henry, my late husband, and how he used to say, "Money comes and goes, Liv, don't let it define you." I smile when I remember that, because he was right in one way. Money doesn't define you, but how you handle it can define your freedom. And as for me, I finally understand that my quiet revenge was never about proving them wrong. It was about showing them what real strength looks like, steady, patient, and kind. They once laughed at my budgeting, but in the end, it saved us all. In the end, I learned that revenge doesn't always need noise or cruelty. It can whisper through actions that heal instead of hurt. What began as quiet defiance became a lesson in love, discipline, and forgiveness. I didn't just fix my family's finances, I fixed the way we saw one another. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of wealth that never runs out. Tell me, if you had the chance to secretly change someone's life, would you do it, even if they never knew it was you? Stories like this remind us that the smallest actions can carry the biggest power. If Olivia's journey spoke to something in your heart, share it with someone who needs that reminder today. And if you believe lessons like these matter, stay with us. There are more stories that prove quiet strength changes everything.